Dear Chaverim, a gute Woche. We are standing now on Motzoi Shabbos Devarim, Shabbos Chazon. We began the fifth Sefer in the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu, before his passing, gathers all of the Jewish people, and he begins to remind them of all of the failings of the past, as we read today in the shul. And the question is, when one is addressing a generation of people that are about to enter into Eretz Yisrael, and you want to inspire them and get them ready for going forward, you begin the Fabrengen, you begin your talk by rehashing the past, by looking back to the past. Likewise, same question. This week is also called Shabbos Chazon. Ask a Jew, why is it called Chazon? And I'll tell you, because being that we read the Haftarah of Chazon Yeshayahu, which is the prophecy that Yeshayahu gave before the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, now that it's Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, we're looking back and we are remembering the words of Yeshayahu. Ask a Chassid, why is this week called Shabbos Chazon? He'll tell you. Because the Rab Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, the Berditchev Rebbe says that on this Shabbos, every Jew sees the third Beis HaMikdash. We all have a vision of what's about to happen, which is why it's called Shabbos Chazon. And the kasha is, how can it be that a Hasidic word should be 180 degrees, the opposite of the traditional understanding of the name? Are we looking back to the Churban? Is it Chazon to the past? Or is it Chazon to the future? And the answer is, it's both. And one is dependent on the other. Meaning, our goal is to look to the future. We are future-oriented people. However, the only way we can successfully go forward into the future is by remembering the past, is by looking back to the past, is by staying better connected to the past. So indeed, the way we are inspired and the way we will succeed in looking at the third Beis HaMikdash is dafka and only through looking to the past. Moshe Rabbeinu, that's getting the generation ready to go forward, is beginning to tell them that the way forward is by looking back at the past, looking back at the glorious past, looking back at the mistakes of the past. That dafka, when we are better connected to the past, could we better succeed going forward, which is the goal, to go forward. And I would like to share an unbelievable story that I heard from Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau, the chief rabbi. He was the chief rabbi of Israel. Actually, after he finished his 10 years of the chief rabbinate, when he then went again to be the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, he, for the first time, around 60 years after the Holocaust, he wrote a book recording his personal challenge and life, beginning with his childhood as he was the youngest survivor from Buchenwald. Now, Rabbi Lau was very much connected, and he spoke a lot about the Holocaust throughout all of these years, but he never had the koyach and the courage to deal with his own personal past. It was too painful for him. It was 60 years after his undergoing the Holocaust that he put it down pen on paper, and he wrote a beautiful book called in Lashon HaKodesh, called in Hebrew, Al Toshes Yotcha El Anar. This book is translated now in over 10 languages. And he shared the following, that after the book came out in the original in Lashon HaKodesh, he received many letters from people that read his book. But there is one letter that he received that he carries around with him. This letter was written to him by a soldier who got terribly wounded in the Second Lebanese War. He was taken from the battlefield directly to the Rambam Hospital in Haifa. And from there, he wrote the letter, and he's describing his ordeal, his terrible wounds, how he was told from the outset that he needs to undergo 7 surgeries. Really, it was 6 surgeries that was prepping him for the real challenging 7th. And unfortunately, the 7th surgery failed. And when he came back to consciousness, he right away understood that because of the initial failing of the surgery, that he only had a few more days to live. However, if he would agree to have this surgery done a second time, even though the chances of survival were very dim, were very little, but he might make it and he might live, but for the hospital to perform such a surgery, he, as an adult, has to sign a consent form that he agrees and he understands the risks involved. So he's writing to Rabbi Lau that his mother comes to him with the consent form, and he already, after weeks of real suffering, of pain, of challenges, of surgeries, and especially the pain that he was in after this final surgery that failed, put him in a very dark place. He became depressed, and he simply lost his desire to live. And with anger, he took the consent form and he threw it to the ground, and he told his mother, "Maspik, basta, enough, I can't take it anymore. I lived 21 years and they were great years, and enough, I can't go through with this." And one can only imagine how the mother and then the father cried with him and pleaded with him, but it was to no avail. He simply gave up on life. Next day was his birthday. His parents called all his friends to celebrate his birthday with him. He was in the ICU. Somehow his friends all got in there, and they brought him balloons, and they wrote him cards, and they gave him gifts. And as they're celebrating his birthday with them, he writes this in his letter to Rabbi Lau: "I was looking at them, understanding that I am celebrating my party of separation, because this indeed was going to be the last time that I would see them. And I made eye contact with each and every one, and they wanted to stay with me, and indeed they stayed in there until midnight, hours after they were told to leave. And that party was so draining that I was in terrible pain to the point that I couldn't fall asleep. And I'm tossing and I'm turning, and it was horrible. Around 3 a.m., I realized that from the many pains that I'm feeling, there was something hard in my bed, in my back. And indeed, I go there and I find a book, and I find your book, Rabbi Lau. Al Toshes Yotche El Anar. And when I see a book, and I realized that one of my friends, as my birthday gift, brought me your book, initially I was very angry. Now, when I'm suffering in the hospital, this is a book that you bring me from a rabbi. I'm not religious. A book about the Holocaust, a depressing book. I was expecting you'd write me a book. Give me an optimistic book. Give me a book of romance. A rabbi's book. Having said that, there was nothing else for me to do. So I decided to open it up. So he's writing, Rabbi Lau, that I began reading this book 3 a.m. I finished it the next day, 1 p.m., 10 hours later. And when I finished the book, I right away called my mother, Ima. She was outside my room. And I told my mother, please bring me the consent form. I'm signing, I'm doing the surgery. Well, my mother couldn't believe her ears, but she right away got the consent form. I signed it. After I signed it, now she had it signed, she asked me, my son, what changed your mind? And I picked up your book and I told my mother, this book changed my mind. That I read about a Jew who, as an infant, as a child, not a father he had, nor a mother, nor a language, nor anything. And somehow he was inspired and he had the koyach and the courage to overcome these challenges and ultimately to make it to the Holy Land and to make a life for himself. And ultimately he became the chief rabbi in Israel. So I'm saying to myself, if he did it, then I can do it. And indeed, he tells Rabbi Lau that I'm writing you this letter a few weeks after my second surgery that was successful. And thank God I was notified today that tomorrow I'm leaving the hospital, and I'm leaving the hospital not on a wheelchair, not on crutches, but I'm walking out on my own 2 feet. This letter, says Rabbi Lau, he carries with him. And he says that as painful as it was for him to look back at his difficult past, writing a book, it was worth it to save the life of this one soldier. And my friends, this is the truth for all of us, that when we look at the past, all of the past, when we stay better connected to our past, to all of our past, the good and to the challenging. Dafka, that connection empowers us to go forward to the future. So as we head into the week of Tisha B'Av, and yes, we are forward-looking people. We are looking towards the redemption, and we know that it's about to happen. At the same time, we look at the past and we mourn for the past with the knowledge that as we are connected to our past, the better connected we are to our parents and to our grandparents, and remembering the sacrifices that they did for us to be where we are right now, we are empowered and inspired to go forward, and we will overcome this final challenge. And as the Rebbe promised us, we will indeed see with our eyes the building of the third Beis HaMikdash. May that happen now. Amen. A gute und a freiliche und a Mashiach dicke Woche to all.